Is there anybody there?
All right, everybody, welcome back to this week's edition of So You Want to Be in IT. We are a podcast aimed at those starting out their journeys in the vast world of IT. We talk about breaking in, navigating that world of IT as a beginner, right? So, again, how to break in, how to climb the ladder, office politics, certs, and pretty much anything in between. So, this is episode 10. I am your host, Pat.
Hey there, Dean's back.
Dean is back again. We let him come back and talk after that awesome episode last week with his buddy AJ, which was amazing. So if you didn't catch that one, go right now, or actually right after this podcast, I should say, go and listen to AJ. He had some really cool stuff to talk about in his journey from the, or I should say, to the CCIE and that massive mountain climb, and we had some really good conversation. So, but this week, episode 10, double digits. Here we are, right? This week we have a tremendous guest, at least for myself, because this is more of like a full circle episode for me. So, as you guys know, on this podcast, we talk about certs and the major factor that we think certs are, and especially in the early stages of your career, certs can really work wonders for folks. This one is we have a guest from Pluralsight. He's a content creator for Pluralsight. He's a manager down there at Cox in Atlanta, where he's from, and Mr. Chris Rees. Hi, Chris. How you doing?
Hey, how's it going, Pat? Dean, nice to meet you guys.
Hey, Chris. How's it going?
Excellent. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming, man. Like I said, this was a full circle episode for me because for those of you that don't know, a couple months ago, I dabbled in the Security Plus cert, sort of start at the bottom of the security world. And Chris's course on Pluralsight is what I took, and I thought it was very, very good, and I got a lot of good intel out of it. And I connected with him on LinkedIn, and here we are. So we're gonna talk security. We're gonna talk, Chris, where you started, how you got there, and all kinds of cool stuff in between. So welcome, man. Thanks for being here.
Sure thing. Absolutely, my pleasure.
So I guess we'll start there. How did you get into IT? Like, was it by chance? Was it by focus? By on purpose? What does that look like? What's your background a little bit?
Yeah, I think truthfully it was a little bit of all three. I started out, way back in the early days of computers. I was, let's see, I graduated high school in '87, so I'm dating myself a bit. But if you kind of unwind that all the way back to when I was in maybe fourth or fifth grade, there was they called a quote unquote gifted program. So you would go to a separate school half day, and we started learning about computers back then. So at that point in time, it was like the Texas Instruments was like a TI-99 with a cassette deck. There was no disk drives. It was nothing. So we learned just basic programming, and that kind of took off for computing. From there, I just migrated from there to like a Commodore 64 to a Apple IIe, Apple II GS, then over to the IBM side. I used to run a couple bulletin boards when I was, like I said, early, maybe 11, 12, 13 years old. I had some bulletin boards with a couple of 300 baud modems coming into the house. My parents were, gracious enough to give me a couple phone lines, and I had a bulletin boards way back when it was, FidoNet and GBBS systems. So CompuServe wasn't around yet. Prodigy wasn't around yet. But the bulletin boards would pass email. So FidoNet was basically email. It might take 3 or 4 days to get around the country. It was almost like the Pony Express, like a digital Pony Express. So some computer, say in Florida, would call my computer 2 or 3 times a day over a 300 baud modem, send email from their computer to my computer. It would shut down. My computer would sort it, call the next computer, and send it to their computer, and it would just eventually the emails would get around, throughout the country or through that specific network. So I was just a little node in the network, so to speak. But that just kind of really got my interest in computers and networking, and like every kid at that point in time, you got a little bit of hacking and freaking and black boxes and silver boxes and blue boxes and all the little
Nice.
hacking freaking
Awesome.
yeah, all that little stuff that was back in the day. So just dabbling. So from there, my whole family was in law enforcement. My dad was a police chief. My brother, cousins, sister-in-law, a couple cousins, they were all cops. So I kind of gravitated towards that field. But not long after I got into there, everything I've ever done always centered around technology. Everyone, kind of pegged me as the computer guy. So I was one of the first ones that were interested or knew enough about computers to start a computer crimes investigation unit for my police department. So I spun that up. I was the first one that really did that. First one that got laptops in the patrol cars, and again, this is like in the early to mid '90s. So it was really on the beginning stages of any of that type of investigative work. So it just took off from there. While I was doing computer crime investigation and those types of things, again, I still wanted to like knew there was a bigger world out there. So I jumped from there into certifications, and I went and got MCSC certification. This was back in NT4 days, NT40. I actually started off with NT351 and then NT4. From there, I got MCSE on like Windows 2000, Windows 2003, A plus, Network plus, Server plus, CCNA, CCNP. Just went through a bit of a certification um, crush at that point. I was just trying to get
Yeah.
everything I could. And like most cops, they have their obviously their full-time job, and most of them have side jobs. And I used to work a bunch of paid jobs, but I'm like, hey, I can make more money teaching than I can, working paid jobs. So I started once I got really kind of I would say adept enough and knew what I was talking about enough from a certification side and just how all that worked. I started teaching, and then as a side job, it just eventually morphed into teaching full time. I did that for 3 or 4 years. Then I got connected. It was kind of the infancy of online training. So there was a company still around today, but I started training with those guys. I think actually I know I was the first trainer outside of the owner of the company that started with that, and I started teaching A plus, Network plus, Server plus, Security plus, all those courses. And it just went on from there. From there, I owned my own company for a few years, and then I switched over to contract training again, and came across Pluralsight, which has been a phenomenal company to work with, and that's kind of where we ended up here. So it's a bit of a zigzag from point A to point B, but everything has always revolved around technology in one form or fashion.
That's awesome. That's a nice break-in story there. That's cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
long
sounds
road.
superb.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yep. Yeah. Probably could have shortened the path a little bit, but you got to do what you got to do.
It is what it is, right? Yeah, that's awesome.
That's right.
So, Chris, now you're at Cox,
Correct.
right? And you're doing I'm sorry, what was the official title that you said earlier?
Yeah, basically, it's managing enterprise storage and data protection,
Okay.
and basically, we're now evolving into some cyber resiliency as well with some of the projects we have going on. But primarily, enterprise storage and data protection, which you know supports really every aspect of the business. Every application sits on top of storage and data protection as well. So we get to touch all aspects of the business, pretty much all applications. It supports everything, including security. So it's a good mix of everything. And we support probably 7 to 8 million customers, and it's a large enterprise, so it gives a chance to
Yeah.
really jump uh, through pretty much every type of hoop. Something
Cool.
I kind of skipped over between the police department and my training. I actually worked in a few other companies, Commerce Bank up in Jersey, which eventually got bought out by TD Bank, but I did server engineering there and a few other engineering roles before I switched over to training full time and then over to Cox. But there's been a few other companies in the mix, but yeah, everything's always been centered around technology.
Cool.
Yeah,
That's awesome, man. That's a great story. It sounds like you got some well-rounded stuff.
Absolutely.
a little bit of everything.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, what kind of sort of cyber crimes were you doing in the police force?
Um, Again, back then it was really kind of in the infancy of that whole the whole genre, so to speak. So everything from, I mean, they kind of classified it as computer crimes, but bank fraud, check fraud, those types of things, identity fraud, into online predator type of stuff, and everything in between. So anything that would involve the computer, it was really that it kind of got lumped in under that auspice. So it was not any one specific thing. Nowadays, it's a lot more granular. So it's kind of typically just like the online predator type stuff, or anything where they're using a computer to commit a crime. Back then, it was like, hey, if you logged on to do online banking or whatever, it was a computer crime. So it was a little more. I would say in its infancy, the tools were definitely not as good. There wasn't a lot of there was some forensics, but they were very rudimentary, and there was a lot of homegrown tools back then. So nowadays, there's some really, I mean, full featured, product suites. In case is probably the on the forefront, but there's a few of them that are just really, really phenomenal. But back then, it was a lot of manual effort.
Wow. Okay, so sounds really interesting.
Yep.
So then, Chris, I guess my next question is, Dean covered the digital forensics and the cybercrime sort of thing. So from that police department, did that ever sort of progress into a full time like cybercrime unit? Like, did you actually start that, or did that like have legs at that point, or?
It did, yeah. So, like I said, I was really the first one to get into that space, but then it definitely grew since there. So they have a full blown cyber crimes department now, first one in the state at that point in time. But it's all the other departments now have pretty much full featured cybercrime units. So it's almost like table stakes nowadays. Every department has
Yeah.
probably one, if not more, kind of verticals within cybercrime investigation or online predator investigations or whatever you want to call it.
Cool. That's awesome.
Sounds awesome. Yeah, that
Mhm.
sounds phenomenal.
That's actually pretty cool. I've always been interested in law enforcement too. Actually, before I got into computers in the high school years, I always like had my idea of being like an FBI agent and working in DC and doing that kind of thing. So the whole and I back then cybercrimes wasn't even a thing. You never even heard of it. But now like that would be way cool. Like if I could start over, that would be like an avenue I would seriously like consider like tracing bad guys and that sort of thing. So.
Oh yeah, the whole. I mean, when you go like even like levels above that to like the NSA, and even within the NSA, they have like the TAL group and a lot of the like ultra specialized groups that really do some of their kind of black ops types of stuff. It's amazing what they can do. I mean, technically, I
Yeah.
think the U.S. is not supposed to be offensive in their cyber activities, but who knows what happens behind the scenes. But
Right.
yeah, it's an interesting space for sure.
Yeah, that's wild. And I don't know, Chris, do you know people in your space? Like, there's a lot of content creators out there right now on the security side of things, especially like I see on LinkedIn. I follow all these guys in the security space, like Neil Bridges and Josh Mason and all those guys on the security side of the fence, right? The offensive side, right? Red team, blue team, those sorts of things. So shout out to Neil, who has a great YouTube channel that he helps, people trying to break into cybersecurity, right? And those tall walls that seem to be, surrounded around the cybersecurity stuff. And he streams like 4 times a week, and he puts in a ton of work. And he's actually an ex NSA hacker. So he's basically been there in the military, and now he's out trying to help people do that kind of thing. So shout out to Neil and his team, and he does a lot. Like I say, he streams like 4 times a week, and I try to join on a Friday and that sort of thing when the weeks kind of calm down and whatnot. But yeah, he's really doing some cool things in the cybersecurity space and trying to get more people involved and make those walls a little shorter. So shout out to him.
No, awesome. Yeah, I mean it's definitely one of those things where there's a massive shortage in people to fill the roles. So
Yeah.
I mean everybody that's trying to fill those gaps it's much needed because there's just so many positions open. I mean globally, but especially in the U.S. There's a huge need for it.
You hear that a lot. Like there's a need for cybersecurity people with technical skills and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But what does the security posture look like in your experience? What kind of security are we looking at here? Are we looking at it from an application standpoint? Are we looking at this at a network standpoint? Are we looking at this at a radio standpoint? Like what kind of security areas are we considering here? Because the area is very vast and
Right.
everything has some sort of element of security there. So just to say security is just very broad, saying I play a sport. Which one?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's what we were talking about just briefly before we started recording here is the fact that folks will ask me a lot. They'll take my Pluralsight course and they say, "Oh, we love the course, but now where should I go?" I'm like, "Well, it really depends on what appeals to you because to your point, Dean, that there's so many different areas, network, application, forensics, specific applications, not even just applications, I mean themselves. There's so many areas. So truthfully, it's a matter of all the above. There's every company has a need for almost everything, and no one person within the quote unquote security realm knows everything about everything. You could be extremely up to speed on application security and not really know squat about networks, or you could be extremely well versed in networks but not really understand how a specific application works. I mean, even if within my own job and even in previous jobs, you'll have I don't want to call it an ivory tower approach, but a lot of times security folks that they know what they need to accomplish, and they say, okay, just go ahead and push it out, or we're going to just push this fix or this patch or this whatever in the middle of the day, at night, whenever, with no regard to maintenance windows and maintenance bridges and the actual downstream
Change
impact.
protocol.
Right,
Yeah.
the change protocol, and the
change
actual
control,
Change
all that
control.
stuff.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
right, the downstream impacts of what they're doing. So it's really a kind of a full spectrum approach where security a lot of times used to be a bolt on, or security was I always call it like no as a service. You ask those guys, can we do this? And they're like, no. Well, can we do this? No. It's like, all right, you know what? I'm not going to ask anymore. I'm just going to go ahead and do it.
That's right.
And then
It's much easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission.
exactly right. So
Amen to that, brother.
that's right. So I think it's it's a change in mindset where security has to be brought thought of in the very beginning and an integral part of the application development, the network design, whatever you have, whatever architecture group you may have, it's got to be tightly integrated with that entire process so that it's not this 11th hour changing everything up because this doesn't work or this doesn't fit that model or you're breaching some type of internal protocol. So yeah, security definitely needs to become much more tightly integrated. And I think there's a need for just everybody, application, network, forensics. I mean, I would say network and application primarily because they're the things that are in the beginning of that process. But definitely threat intelligence is a big one, which is kind of catching steam because it will augment and really kind of feed every other aspect of security. When you have people that can really
Okay.
bring in all that additional data and outside elements and kind of feed fill the gaps between what you're seeing, what indicators of compromise. Okay, well that's great. What does it mean? Well, the threat intelligence analyst can fill that in from all the different attack groups and all the ATPs and all the different things that they're seeing from the threat intelligence feeds and whatnot. They can augment that data, send it back to the analyst that's actually needs to do something with it. It can now become actionable, and they can pass it on to the rest of the organization to act upon it. So it's not a one size fits all. It's a team effort for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like I said, I think there's some massive shortages in in the security world. So for you, for those of you listening out there that don't know what to get into or try to still feel your way, sort of thing, security is never going to be a bad answer. There's always somebody out there looking for something, like Chris said, whether it's application, whether it's network, whether it's threat intelligence, whether threat hunter is now the sexy word right out there. So you're looking for bugs and bug bounties and all those types of things, and people pay you to look for bugs, that sort of thing. Like who would have thought of this like even 10 years ago? Like that's just an insane concept to me. Like stuff just like pops up on the scene. You're like, okay, this is an official title now, and you're like, what? Like it's so crazy. Like for example, like a social media manager, like 10-15 years ago you never even would have thought that was a thing, but now those are legit full-time jobs that companies have that just manage their social media. Like
Sure.
what a time to be alive. You know what I mean? Like it's just so insane.
Oh, I know. I mean, my son has his own company, and they do videography, photography, social media management, branding, and he's doing exceptionally well with it. So yeah, there's need across the board. And
It's so crazy.
to your point, as far as the size of the company doesn't matter. You could be a very small mom and pop shop, and you might think, well, we don't really have a need for security. But the thing is, hackers are becoming more and more sophisticated. They understand that
Yeah.
this little small company actually integrates, and maybe they're a supplier or a vendor to this much larger company. The larger company is much more secure, so I can't penetrate their perimeter defenses and whatnot. But hey, this little small company, they're very, very vulnerable. So I'll go in the side door, infiltrate them, and then basically pass code on or whatever they're doing to the bigger company. And they call them watering hole attacks or other types
Oh,
of
the old SolarWinds attack.
right SolarWinds, the whole
Yeah,
supply chain
yeah,
attack. Yeah, that entire
yeah.
concept is like we'll go in through the side door, and now we can infect 1, 10, 50, 100. Kaseya was the same thing. They had basically a remote control protocol or application rather that would allow for like remote management of a bunch of smaller companies. So they breached, the
Yep.
actual parent company that's supporting 150 or maybe 1,000 smaller companies. Now,
Right.
guess what? You have access to
Now you have
1,000
access to all those underneath.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
100%.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
not just the big companies that are the targets anymore.
No, that's a good point. As far I was going to bring that up as far as, and I don't have any statistics of this.
Right.
It does seem that hackers are going after the quote unquote smaller companies because I mean, you can be a smaller company and make some and obviously make bank, right?
Mhm.
So money is money at that point. So
Right.
and I think they're starting to figure out that obviously security is being more of the forefront and getting a bigger seat at the table nowadays, right? To your point, Chris, a couple minutes ago about talking about security from the start of the project rather than a bolt on after. But
Right.
it's one of those things where like the larger companies have more walls in place and more lines of defense, and those smaller companies may not. So your threat attack space is larger from a smaller company because they only have one wall compared to I don't know, a Neiman Marcus or any kind of major department store chain that has 6 or 10 walls,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Yep. Yeah. So it's a never ending environment. It's never ending threat evolution, because as Internet of Things become more and more prevalent, I mean, even these bigger
Yeah.
companies now, they're bringing in thermostats and monitors and edge devices that
Yeah.
work within their environment. Every single one of those now becomes a point of attack. So it just becomes monumentally harder to secure all these things across the board. So
Yeah, and to that point, traditionally, those Internet of Things devices are like Swiss cheese when it comes to security. They're
Mhm.
not built for security; they're built for convenience.
Right.
So, and attackers know that. So
Mhm.
every the Nest that you have, the Google Homes, the Alexas, the smart TVs, the smart garage door openers, like when they build those things, they don't think of, and maybe I'm shortchanging them, and I don't mean to sound nasty, but their focus is opening and closing the garage, not security and brick walls and
Correct.
making to sure this thing isn't like I said, like Swiss cheese.
Right. Well, even those devices, I mean, whether it's whatever, pick your processor of choice, Arduino, Raspberry Pi, Zigbee,
Yep.
whatever the network and so forth is. Those things, like to your point, are so small. They have a tiny amount of RAM, a tiny amount of processing power. They can't do like the larger hashing algorithms. So security is in some cases is there, but it's very weak. It's breakable just because by virtue of what the device is, it can't support the processing to really crush security. So yeah, all of those
Yep.
things become literally just like very I wouldn't even say defensible locks. You could probably push on it hard enough and the lock would break open, and you're in. So yeah,
That's why you have to start segregating all these networks out and all these devices out.
correct.
That's
You
what I
can't
do
just
at
have
home.
it. Yeah, yeah. You can't just have it as a flat layer 2 network
Right.
anymore. It's too dangerous.
Yeah, even
Hell
at your
no.
home now, you need
Yeah.
13 networks and a DMZ and everything.
Basically, yeah,
It's
just
brutal.
to stay safe, just so no one can look at your cameras.
Right.
It's insane.
Yeah, cameras are another one. Swiss cheese, my goodness. Yeah, that's what I do at home. I mean, everything that I have connects wirelessly, so they just get their own SSID, and it's just a straight pipe to the internet. That's it, in and out.
Mhm.
All the personal laptops. Obviously, this laptop we're on now, everything internal is on its own. It's on its own Wi-Fi, and that's it. I mean, obviously, that's not the whole. That's not the whole shoot and match sort of thing, but at least it's something. You're not on all one flat all one flat subnet, and everybody just gets the room of the house once, because once you're compromised, or once you're compromised, that's it. They get the whole shooting match. They get the whole, they see the whole thing. So
Right.
you got to be very careful with those types of deals. And I'm not saying they're not good products. Yes, they make our lives easier, but they're just not built for security. And
Right.
and guys like us on this podcast they don't. We think of security first, I guess, because that's the space we live in.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and there's a trade-off, like you said. I mean, it's the old age-old dilemma that the harder you make it, or the more secure you make it, that the harder it is to for the average user to use, and then they start writing passwords and sticking it on their monitor, or leaving it on their desk, and so it's
Yep.
there's a law of diminishing returns. You make it difficult to the point where they really can't. It's not convenient. Then they'll just leave the keys laying on the table. So it's like
Yep.
there's a trade-off.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And so I want to circle back a little bit to the security folks and for those listening, and how to try to break in and things of that nature. And
Mhm.
and Chris, over the last I want to say probably the last 5 years, really 5-6 years, somewhere in there, the amount of free content that's out there from a learning perspective is really ramped up. And when I say free, it's either going to be free or like very low minimum cost to break in, especially in the cybersecurity side. So you have sites like TryHackMe and Hack the Box and
Mhm.
Attack IQ, Range Force, the Cyber Mentor. I forget the guy's name at Cyber Mentor, but he his stuff is like $10, and I've heard very good things about the Cyber Mentor and the content he puts out. So like.
Mhm.
You have all this stuff that is now just available to these security professionals or cybersecurity guys trying to break in, and
Right.
there's I don't want to say it's almost too much because it's never enough, but you almost have to figure out what you want to do and then sort of specialize in that. Like just like Dean and I in the networking space, right? Yeah, you can jump into networks, but what do you want to do? You want to do, now with networks, there's automation, there's all the software defined networking, SD-WAN, all that stuff. I mean, you could literally pick an avenue and go for forever and just do that, that sort of thing. So I just want to get your take on the amount of free content that's out there, very, very low cost, I should say, content, full blown like platforms like Try Hack Me and Hack the Box, which literally give you a sandbox to play in and be a hacker in your own sandbox. So what are your thoughts on that, and sort of how do you see that going forward?
Yeah, no, I think all those things are phenomenal. I mean, years ago, like none of that stuff existed. So if you wanted to play in those types of environments, you had to have all the prerequisite knowledge to set up VirtualBox or VMware, or have the resources to spin your own things up, and then multiple copies of it, multiple versions to set up your own networks. And back in the day when we used to do like MCSE courses and labs, you had to set up your entire forest and all the AD and all the subcomponents, and it was a massive amount of effort. Nowadays, you can go on, like you said, Try Hack Me or any of those platforms, hit a button, and it spins up a virtual instance for you, whether it's in AWS or Azure. I'm not sure where those things are located off the top of my head, but it gives you a nice sandbox to play in. Now, granted, those things are kind of limited, as it's not like a completely free roam environment, but I mean, you can do a lot of stuff within there and understand or get a lot of the key concepts, a lot of the basics. So I think those things are great. Like I said, I'm a contractor for Pluralsight, so I don't work there full time, so I can't speak to like their roadmap completely. But I know they're incorporating a lot of those same types of things within some of their courses coming down the pike. Some are more integrated than others, obviously, but I think it was kind of an evolution. Whereas it used to be just like straight lecture. I mean, way back in the 20 years ago, when I used to do this, I had a Wacom tablet, and I would sit there and draw out and actually draw like I was whiteboarding in a class when I would teach the videos and so forth. Then it progressed to a little bit more of an animation and a little more professional look and feel, but it was still more or less lecture based, which is for some content is perfect. You don't necessarily need labs and you don't need to dig in. Some of it is you just need to conceptually how things work and how things function. So that's perfect. But for some of these other courses, yeah, I think you need to dig in and you need to have that sandboxed environment so you can really try and understand. Because as you know, there are different types of learners. There are visual ones. There are ones that can read it and get it. Other ones have to actually point and click. Some people benefit from that, some don't. Some people, like in the old days, you'd sit in the classroom and you just flip the page. Okay, it says do this, you click 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 and do that, and flip the page, click 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 and do that, just to get through the course. And you 5 minutes later you leave and I have no idea what I just did. I just followed the instructions. So
Yeah,
there's some of that, I think.
it's always benefit to building your own lab, I think.
Yeah, so
for sure.
That's why I'm a big proponent of like almost not giving people a specific roadmap on how to get from point A to point B, because then that's all they know, or they think that's all there is. I mean, there's definitely value to it, but I think I've always learned most when I kind of don't know what I'm doing yet and I figure it out and I make all the mistakes. Because once you make a mistake and you spend time actually learning how to fix it, then it sticks. Then you remember,
for sure.
right?
Yeah.
Then you remember, how you actually got to that point, and it just stays with you forever. Versus
you're actually denying the learner from learning. I think
right,
you're taking that from them.
Yeah, so I think that it's kind of a mix. You need a little bit of everything, so that way you touch on all the things that appeal to all the different types of learners. But I think if you go through and kind of get all of those things collectively in your journey, whether it's a certification or a specific skill set, I think there's no one size fits all. Some things are going to stick with some folks better than others, but I think it's great to have all those options available to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, what would you, if you were starting your career again, Chris? Where would you start? Would you go more application wise? Would you go more networking wise? Would you go more sort of the forensics, the sort of military side? What sort of excites you, or where do you see the greatest opportunity for newcomers in the cyberspace, or trying to break the cyberspace right now?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's so many different ways. I mean, you really could go a dozen different directions. It really depends on what excites you, that person personally. For me,
Oh, granted, but what would you go for?
yeah, for me, I mean, I would definitely, if I started out knowing nothing, I would definitely get just some general, obviously, computer knowledge, just so I understand, terminology, how things work at a conceptual level. Networking, I think you definitely need to have an understanding of, because even if you go into forensics or you go into cloud or you go into whatever, if you're designing networks, you're designing applications, you need to understand, how to cordon things off. If you go into the cloud side, everything's virtual. You can click up, your firewalls and and everything else virtually. So it's not as much of a pain to procure the hardware and all the physical configurations, but you still have to
Okay.
understand conceptually how it all works and how to set up the, whether it's firewalls or just networking itself, zero trust or more of a traditional network. That stuff needs to be, I think, fundamental to someone's background. But yeah, if it were me, I would probably focus nowadays more on cloud type stuff, just because I think everything is eventually in one form or fashion going to get there. Even the larger companies, if they're not like full public cloud, they're all developing their own internal clouds, and they all want the same type of cloud-like experience. So SD-WAN, just virtualization across all aspects of network storage, compute internally. So S3 protocols across the board for application accessibility and so forth. Storage, same types of things. All those things are coming down to a cloud-like experience. Whether it's not, doesn't necessarily have to be AWS or Azure or GCP. It's a matter of they want that elastic scalability and that kind of like zero touch provisioning type of stuff. The automation, Ansible, Python. I think I'd have some scripting in my background as well to make sure I understand the automation side. But yeah, I think those are the things that I would focus on specifically in today's world. I think just from a wow, this is really cool type of thing. I still like the forensic side of the house. I think it's a much more of a niche. It's it's not as widely marketable across the board. Just being honest. But I think that it's extremely valuable. But I think just from someone wanting to get into the field and say where can I become most marketable, I think a security background with a bent towards cloud, call it whatever you want, cloud-ish type of environments, I think is the way to go.
That's a good segue. I think so. I wanted to kind of touch on that as far as like cloud security, and I think in the next couple of years, cloud security is going to absolutely explode, even more so than what security is exploding already.
Mhm.
So what do you see on the cloud security side of things as far as trying to wrap security, wrap encryption, wrap all those hashes and all those baked in security terms around a virtual cloud that you don't necessarily control? You do control it, but you don't know who else you're sharing it with, and those sorts of things. How do you
Right.
see that playing out?
Right. So that's always the big challenge. So once you go into the cloud proper, where it's actually like the true cloud, whatever, Google, Amazon, Azure, Rackspace. I mean, you name it.
So we're talking about public cloud
Yeah,
here, right?
public
Not
Yeah,
cloud.
public
yeah,
cloud.
public
Yeah,
cloud. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Right. So it's a multi-tenant environment. You don't really control the hardware to any way, shape, or form. So yeah, it's really a matter of understanding S3 buckets. I mean, if you go out and just like do a search on Google Dorks, I mean, you can find all kinds of things where there are publicly accessible, like secrets. S3 buckets are publicly accessible because they have not been secured properly. And there's been some major banks just because they had an incorrectly configured web application firewall, right? And it's just they allow people in the front door or the side door, and 1 billion accounts were compromised or close to that, at least 50 million, whatever, I forget the exact number, but a very large number of accounts were compromised for something that was relatively simple. So yeah, I think as that becomes
But the simple stuff always gets overlooked.
right,
Always.
that's the bane of your existence. You always focus on the complicated stuff because you think the simple stuff is already taken care of, and it's not. So you have
It's
to
not.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so standardization is the key. I think obviously making sure all the boxes are checked, but encryption is the big one. I mean, a lot of things are not encrypted. People think that that's because it's in the cloud, it's encrypted, but most of the cloud providers kind of have somewhere buried in their agreements that they can decrypt your data and scan it, and then if they find things that are whatever not kosher or illegal or whatever, they can report that to the authorities. Or who's to say hackers can't do the same type of thing? So it's always a good idea to own your own encryption keys and encrypt your stuff on site, and before you upload it to a cloud, to whatever the cloud provider is, maintain your own secrets. I mean, there's a lot of different companies out there that can manage secrets across the board. But the challenge is it's such a fast moving space and it changes constantly. It's it's hard to keep up with the rate of change, quite frankly.
yeah. And we Dean, you and I talked about that a couple episodes ago. You're either, and Chris, I'm sure you would agree, but you're either studying for that next thing that's on the cusp or on the horizon, or you're sort of falling behind. There is no standing still in the IT space just because it moves so quick. You can't catch your breath.
Right.
So true.
Yeah. I mean, with everything, there's always a caveat. I mean, especially in the larger enterprise space, there's always going to be, traditional IT where, you have the monolithic applications or the things that can't move to the cloud for whatever reason. It's too expensive to retool the application, or, what have you. So there's always going to be a place, at least for the foreseeable future, where you're going to have like your tried and true network
Yeah.
guys and your compute guys and storage guys, and those things will stay. But as far as, having folks that want to be nimble and marketable and be able to jump companies and you know advance their career rapidly, yeah, you need to have you need to have skills that are marketable. So cloud skills are going to be, you can't go wrong. Security skills, you can't go wrong. Whether it's with
Yep.
a third party company like a consulting company that does, penetration testing or security, specifically, or if it is just a company that does remote management of other companies. All those things allow you to get a really good view of a lot of companies at once. So you're not working for just one company for 20 years. Nowadays, people will work for consultancies or for ones that manage, other companies. They're VARs or consultants. They get a lot of exposure across the board from a lot of different companies on how they do things, and that comes with a price, because you now have a very kind of I'd say wide berth of experience. You're not just seeing one way of doing it. Now you see 50 companies' ways of doing it, and you can kind of assimilate best practices out of that and develop your own, best way of doing things.
Sounds awesome. That
Yeah.
sounds really good.
Yeah.
That's a really good shout. And tradition. I don't know. I use this word loosely, but traditional network guys like Dean and I, and that came up in the mid the early 2000s, and really started to find our stride in the mid 2000s, and here we are in the quote unquote senior senior titles and things of that nature. But
Mhm.
and it's always funny because I find it that the network side was always or I should say, they're sort of late to the virtualization party,
Mhm.
right? So VMware has been around for forever, and that sort of thing. But now, like, the network side is sort of catching up, and as far as like putting Palo Altos or putting ASAs in the cloud and letting them run in there, or just on VMs inside your own data center, brick and mortar data centers, and things of that nature. So I find it cool that we're sort of catching up to that curve, and then with that comes the automation, right, and the SDN or SD-WAN, which is taken off right now, obviously for various reasons and
Right.
things of that nature. And I always find it odd that, like, because I work with a couple guys in past lives that, like, hated anything with the cloud. Oh, the cloud, you're gonna take people's jobs and this and that. It's like, no, it's like what did you do when VMware came around? You went from a physical server onto someone's desk to literally just virtualizing it in one chassis. What did you do? You adapted. You learned how to run
Yeah, but there is
VMware.
there's still that one chassis there.
Oh yeah,
Just to
it's
keep them warm. There's
right.
there's no chassis to keep you warm on a cold night now.
Right. I'm thinking, like, like, okay, like, but like, you have all these sort of old school guys that are like, cloud this, I hate it, and blah blah blah. It's like, look, it's the way the world's going, man. People realize what the advantages are, and either you're getting on board or you're retiring early. That's just what it is.
Right. I mean, that's just change 101. I mean, most people are resistant to change, but
100%.
I have some good friends that work at Amazon, AWS, and the same thing. They're like, "Oh, I went from traditional quote unquote IT to Amazon. I don't have to worry about, you know, any physical infrastructure anymore." Blah blah blah. I'm like, "Yeah, you don't, but guess what? There's still people at Amazon who work at the data center, and there's still people working with
Right.
physical infrastructure. Those things still exist. It's just
Right.
it's abstracted from where you're at now, but
Right.
those things are still important. Somebody's still got to rack stack
true.
configure, do all the networking, do all the physical
Yep.
connectivity. It's just that it's automated to the point where it's like, one FTE per 30,000 servers, where the average
Right.
company is maybe 1 to 100. So I mean, the level of automation is through the roof, but the basic fundamentals are still there.
Yeah. We'll always have a job because there's always going to have to be fundamentals somewhere. Like,
Right. Yeah, and when things break,
Yeah.
if all you ever know how to do is like the very high level automation piece, when it actually breaks and it really falls apart, it's like, all right,
Yeah.
now who do you call? It's like
Yeah.
all those skill sets have evaporated.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the other thing I wanted to touch on too is, like, so I sort of dabbled in this as well, and trying to, sort of fortify myself for the future and things of that nature. And I want to get your take on the security side of things too, if it's advantageous. And you sort of mentioned it, but like learning some sort of programming language. And I think Python now is probably the most popular
Mhm.
that's out there. And it's relatively easy to digest. And do you see I guess it depends on specialty of what sort of vein in security you want to go to, right? But you obviously see advantageous knowing Python and those sorts of types of programming languages.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I think those things from an automation perspective are big. Python, I mean, Ansible is another big one, just as a framework to automate. And if you have a more mature like CI/CD pipeline, Jenkins or some type of automation, kind of orchestrator framework that orchestrate the orchestrator of orchestrators, so to speak. Those things are extremely important. But again, it there's no one size fits all. It depends on the company, the maturity level. Some people are in their infancy, but I think at a minimum, having some Python in your background, Ansible are probably the two biggest ones. I mean, some companies use other ones like Java.net. They're kind of not as popular anymore, but I mean, there's other ones out there that are just as popular. I mean, once we start getting into the post quantum cryptography and looking at like Q sharp and all these things that which aren't really here yet, but they're coming down the pike. That's going to be a big push in the next probably I don't know 5-10 years. It's hard to predict, but once quantum computers really kind of become more mainstream and they can crack modern day cryptography, all the encryption and so forth, it's going to be like there's going to be a huge push to go to the next level. So
Right.
it's
But is that true? They reckon that I thought that quantum computers couldn't break AES 256.
Um, from what I've read, I mean, and they're not really here mainstream yet. I think as of right now they can't. But from what I've read, that once that actually kind of becomes a little bit more mainstream and it doesn't cost like $1 million to run five operations, even the NSA is recommending that people start implementing. I think it's basically like post quantum cryptography. So there's a new algorithms that they're looking to implement because they predict that the other ones, everything in today's world will be breakable within the next 5-10 years or whatever,
Wow,
whatever that threshold is going to be.
Wow.
that's going to change the whole internet.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
huge.
I mean, it might be
That's
20 years.
insane.
It might be 20 years from now. It might be 5 years. You know how the exponential growth of things as we become more and more computing power and new things get developed, it makes our ability to develop even new things even faster. So it's not just a linear curve. It's more of a hockey stick. There'll be some inflection point where that just takes off like a rocket. So it's
Wow.
yeah.
So what this Python language you were describing to the average listener out there, what should they sort of concentrate if they were going to get into Python? Would it be more sort of like scripting? Would it be more like building applications? Would it be more like building your own custom applications for security to speed things up? Like where you sort of going with the programming kind of aspect?
I wouldn't necessarily say like full blown programmers or application developers. It's more along the scripting lines. Like where everything
Okay.
things used to be like everything was bash scripts or whatever. It would be kind of more rudimentary. I mean, they could be complicated, but just more of a rudimentary like one machine, one script type of thing. Whereas Python is more extensible. It can plug into Ansible code and it now can be used to run. It's more modular, so you can plug it into multiple machines or multiple processes within a workflow. And then the whole idea of like the whole DevOps model is that you'll have like a staging QA dev environments before it moves into production, and then things just get automated through these different sub environments, so that you can push out changes, very iterations of changes much more rapidly. So instead of pushing out a change like once a quarter, you could probably do it multiple times per day. And so
Yeah.
that
So you got continuous integration.
correct, right? So
Yeah.
that iterative approach, that very fast.
So your advice is to build these sort of environments in your in your home lab kind of deal to get some experience because the average user starting to learn sort of Python and those kind of languages,
Mhm.
then go into sort of Jenkins and CI integration. That's a huge jump, and then you only really need those things when you're working in teams, right?
Yeah, yeah. For the most part, I mean, those types of like CI/CD environments are usually on larger companies or more mature environments. So it's not going to be a 3 or 4 person company typically. Although I guess it could be, but just depends on how many changes you do, I guess. But yeah, there is a jump, but I would think that having the fundamental skills of just understanding programming logic, um, a lot of the more modular programs, like just how the whole framework works of calling other pieces of code like reusable pieces of code. And that's really kind of like the whole background where the new buzzword is infrastructure as code. Like everybody wants to have that where it's reusable snippets. And
Yeah.
there's definitely viability to that, but again, it depends on the environment. Like something that's applicable to the networking space, you're not necessarily going to use that piece of code when you're talking about server builds or storage provisioning, or or whatever the case may be. But within an application, if you develop a piece of code that can whatever, create a firewall rule, or segment a network, or whatever your little piece of the world is, that if you can take that piece of code which is tried and true and works, and then make expose it via an API to other groups that need to call that function, you can now make that as a service type of thing. So they don't have to contact you every time they need
Oh,
to do something. You can
I
publish,
see your point now.
right, you can
So
publish,
some sort of API like GitHub or something where they can constantly call you. I see what you mean.
right.
I see your point now.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you for going deeper. I was lost a little, but yeah, I see your point now. And that way you can publish yourself. I've seen this a lot where people
right.
write a piece of code and then like there's this software out there and the manufacturer hasn't maybe came out of a good way to update the firmware, for instance, and then you can just download it off GitHub and then run that API constantly, and then that piece of code's always used.
Right.
It's quite phenomenal actually.
Right.
I see your point now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even within a company, you can do that. Like if you need to, if you have another group that's doing self-service, or provisioning a specific piece of infrastructure, sandbox, a virtual machine, whatever. If you have, your application or your piece of networking equipment or your storage, whatever, you can publish APIs to them. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. All they need to have to understand is how to call the API. They don't have to understand how it
Yeah.
works. So it just
Makes
makes
sense.
it as a service.
Oh yeah, I like your thinking. I like your thinking of that. It gives you the complete package. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's really great.
Yep.
So instead of just writing the code, you can actually give the code to the service, and everyone can just call your service, and yeah, you're good to go.
Right.
Look at that. See, we solve problems here. This podcast, left and right.
There you go.
Bells and whistles and lights go on. Light bulbs go on all the time here.
That's right.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves. I think it's a coding world in the future, right? Some programming language is eventually going
Absolutely.
to take over the world, right? That's just a hard, fast truth.
Yeah.
So I think Python is, especially for Dean and I and the network folks that are listening and sort of been in there, automation has gotten huge over the last couple of years, and it's certainly not going away, right? So we're used to Python, we're used to again Ansible, Puppet, Chef, things of
Right.
that nature.
Yep.
Trying to, like I said, reuse snippets and just make it an API call and make everyone's job a little easier at the end of the day, right? You're not reinventing the wheel every
Sure.
time you want to make a change. So I think knowing at least a little bit of Python, at least in your realm or your space, what you do day to day, is certainly not gonna hurt. As far as breaking in, Chris, as far as like titles and sort of, I don't want to say low hanging fruit that kind of cheapens it, but to break down some of those barriers, do you find that cybersecurity has rather high walls that are sort of unrealistic for those trying to break in? To me, it seems like it is. Like it's worse in cybersecurity than it is in some other places, some other spaces of like, hey, this is an entry level, but you need a CEH, you need this, you need that, and it's like, oh, that like that's a lot of stuff to ask for a junior person or somebody breaking in for a couple bucks. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, and I'll do a shameless plug for for my course as a plural site, but I mean, the Security Plus is a great way, a great certification. It's basically an entry level certification, but it gives you a very wide breadth across a lot of technologies. So it's very wide and a little deep, but it's not as super deep as, like, say, the CISSP or a few others that kind of dig in, or some of the GIAC or SANS certifications for sure. But it's a great way to get in and understand a lot of different pieces of the puzzle. But yeah, it's the same on the networking side. It's the same on the storage side. That Windows 2003 will come out, and I'm just doing it anecdotally, but I remember reading a posting way back when saying, you need to have 10 years of experience with Windows 2003. It's like literally just came out 6 months ago. It's like the recruiters have no idea.
It's only 2006. What do you mean?
I know. But the recruiters just put these, just pie in the sky, requirements, and a lot of times it's just not achievable. So yeah, it's one of those things where, me as a person going into the field new, I would definitely not get discouraged by that, because it really is sometimes unreal, a lot of times unrealistic. But that doesn't mean that the job's not there. It really boils down to your ability to interview, to sell yourself. And a lot of times it's very difficult to even get to that point, obviously, right? Because you put yourself up on LinkedIn or Dice or Indeed, or pick your job thing of choice. that goes
Yeah.
into a black box and you never see anything. So
Sure.
that's obviously a way to do it, but I've always had the most success, and you guys may have as well. But it's a matter of networking and who you know. It's usually done by referral. So
Yeah.
I would really encourage anyone looking to break in to really spend at least as much time on developing your network and developing some warm references, somebody that can speak on your behalf. That 9 times out of 10 will carry more weight than just submitting your resume on a site and hoping it catches the right recruiter who doesn't a lot of times not even
Yeah.
understand the
The right
nuances
eyes.
of
Yeah.
what the position holds.
Yeah. I agree.
But would that matter due to the fact that this industry's so hot right now and there's a shortage?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I think it's a good question. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think there's definitely a shortage, but by the same token, then the competition is higher. So people can ask for more. I think sometimes artificially, like over and above what they're really necessarily qualified for, potentially. So I think recruiters sometimes will then try to vet even harder or try to eliminate people off the bat. So, and I'm just speaking anecdotally. I don't know that for a fact, but that seems like that could be a double-edged sword. There's definitely a need for it, but I think that the people who have the need don't necessarily know what they're asking for. So that they say, "Oh, I need a security guy." Well, as we've talked about, okay, well, what kind of security? Just because I know networking doesn't necessarily mean I know storage, or if I know applications doesn't necessarily know I know forensics, or whatever the case may be. So there's definitely the shortage is there, but I think the people that are requiring or requesting the positions don't necessarily know exactly what they're asking for. So I think the onus is on both sides to be able to present yourself properly, to be able to sell yourself, to say, I can fill here's the problem that I see that you have, or problem that you need filled, and here's how I can fill it. And so, it's part selling and it's part knowing what to ask for, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. I think, like I said, there's a massive shortage, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on. Do you think the security jobs, either today as the state that they're in, or in the future, do you think they're more on the private side, or do you think they're on the public, say government side? Is there a battle going on between the two of them, or is it just one big pot to split down the middle? Or
Um, well,
That's a
yeah.
good question.
Again, there's definitely I'd say it's split down the middle. 9 times out of 10, people that go on the public side do it for a period of time, and then they switch over to the private side because there's a lot more money. So
right?
generally speaking,
Yeah,
and a lot of the military folks are like some of the sharpest ones that come out of there, especially like out of the Air Force. That's funny because I have probably just personally seen the most experience with the Air Force guys, but super super sharp, cybercrime folks and so forth. So
yeah,
it really just depends. Like everything in IT, it depends. But I mean, there's a massive shortage on the government side. Certifications are key to the government too, because DoD requirements and some of the other mandates that are coming down. So you have to be certified to even touch a government network. So
right.
security or certifications rather are key to even securing those jobs. So if you don't have a certification, you can't even get your foot in the door. So in
Yeah, I
those
know the Air
regards,
Force were like that.
yeah,
They were huge on that with the CCNA.
yep,
I taught a few of those folks. They said that's exactly what they said. They can't touch a government network unless we're certified,
right,
which I thought was crazy,
yeah.
but I get it.
Yep, and there's different tiers. I mean, Security Plus fills a lot of those gaps, but a lot of the GIAC certifications, SAN certifications, CEH, some of the EC Council stuff. So there's different tiers, and whether you're an actual like a administrator or you're a manager, there's different tracks you go on. But yeah, so that's huge, from a certification standpoint. Once they do that for a few years, a lot of them were like, "This is great, but I can make 3 times as much if I go over here," and they jump into the private side and
Right.
they make them, big money.
There you go. Look at that.
Yeah.
Big money, right? Big money, but a lot of stress, right? That's just what it is.
Oh
So,
yeah.
a
Yep.
lot of sleepless nights and not a whole lot of budget to work with, right? At least that's
Right.
my experience of, CISOs trying to, sit at the board table and beg for money, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. Well, it's one of those things. It's just like, being a cop at 90% of the time, it's kind of, I wouldn't say boredom per se, but it's, not life threatening. And then all of a sudden it just, everything hits the fan and it's like, you know,
Yep.
all out. So same thing with security. A lot of times it's kind of mundane compliance, governance, making sure policies are in place, making sure you're doing all your stuff. And then the breach happens and then it's all hands on deck and everyone's called to the carpet. So it's, there's there's definitely ebbs and flows. But again, if you're looking for the jobs with a lot of responsibility and a lot of pay, job security, whatever, there's certain things that come along with it. So it's a give and take.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me of another question. So, talking about CISOs and people of important security minded folks and asking for money and things of that nature. All three of us on this podcast. I'm sure people listening at home, but me personally, a lot of them, my bosses and previous places I've worked at, and it's not a blanket statement, but a lot of them, they aren't as technically minded as some people that report to them. So
Mhm.
you sort of have to break it down into, okay, you have to sort of sell your value on, I want this because
Right.
X, and it's going to help the business because Y, that sort of thing. Do you feel that there's a shortage of communication between technical people trying to stop the bad guys at the door and the quote unquote bean counters that actually pony up the money for this stuff? Like, do they see the value? Is that communications not quite yet? Because it feels like it's like, okay, it's not a problem until it is, that sort of thing.
Well, that's exactly right. Yes, that's definitely a problem. I think for the most part, technical folks have I don't want to call it a problem in of itself, but by nature they're very technical. So if you ask
Sure.
them A, they'll tell you A. They won't sugarcoat it. They don't put it into business terms. They just tell you the technical problem and the technical solution
Yeah,
without tying it to business problems and business outcomes. Because
that's me.
yeah,
I'm
there's
guilty of that. Yeah, it's just what it is.
right. So there's definitely a disconnect. That's why I think a lot of times you need a liaison kind of in between, to almost translate and say, okay, well here's what can go wrong, but here's how it can actually impact the business. And it's like selling fear. It's very hard to do. Just like selling insurance is hard to do. Even like when I was a
Yeah,
cop, the better job you did, the less people thought they needed you because like, we don't need any police because there's no crime. Well, you don't. There's no crime because we're doing a really phenomenal job.
good
So
job. Right.
same thing with security. The better job you do, the less they think they need you because we don't have any incidents. There's no breaches. There's no this, no that. We don't have to spend all this money on security. So unfortunately, it's one of those things where you have to be good at selling the fear. For lack of a better term, you have to understand or be able to tie the objective to the business value to the business outcome and just paint the picture as to why they need it. So you can use breaches in similar companies in similar areas where the company right down the street just had a $40 million breach, or our same company across the other side of the world just got hit twice and they paid the ransom but they actually didn't close the door, and then 2 weeks later they got hit again and had to pay another $3 million ransom, or whatever the case might be.
Right.
So you can definitely document it and tie it to real world cases where that used to be a lot less of a possibility, but nowadays people are getting hit left and right. So it's not really a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So those types of things I think are becoming easier to sell because everyone is aware. Even insurance companies now, like cyber insurance, won't insure the company if they don't have these specific controls in place. You have to have, whether it's encrypted backups or a cyber vault or offsite backups or whatever, and then your different firewalls in place and your different perimeter defenses and application security and blah blah blah. So all of those things.
I always found that area interesting because I thought that's great, wonderful. They've done a really good job. Like hands up. Who's checking that?
Right. Well, yeah. And again, like everything else, it depends. If you're a specific type of company or a specific industry, you'll get what's called SOC audits, and they're actually teams that will come in and audit your entire infrastructure. They'll actually look at all your controls. Do they work? And it depends on the SOC level, but I mean, some of them are just, do you have them in place? And then it may go a step further and say, do you have them in place and have they been tested and do they work? And they'll give a full report. So yeah, and again, from an insurability standpoint, especially for like service providers and so forth, that companies that want to enlist their services have to be guaranteed that higher level company is secure, so they can't go in themselves and audit. So they'll rely on these SOC audits to say, yep, they're secure here, and here's, or they're not, and here's where they failed, and then here's how it got tightened up or whatnot. So yeah, to your point, sometimes they're audited, sometimes they're not. It just depends on the type of company, the size of the company, and so forth. But yeah, it's a bit of a I hope things are good.
Yeah. It turns into a rat race at that point. You're like,
Right.
I hope it, those stitches that we put together, I hope that they don't pop.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Well, to your point, that I get the SOC audit, but then your third party and your security responsibilities to another to another security what you know nothing about,
Right.
and then in the hopes and faith that they're doing a good job, but who's to say they're doing a good job?
Right. Well, at the upper levels of like supply chain management and some of the, again, size of the company, of course, but typically they'll work out agreements between the companies where they have to actually sign off and say, yeah, our security controls meet your security controls, and here's our bare minimums, and you have to kind of sign off and say if you're going to do some operating level agreement and say if we're going to do business together, here's our minimum requirements, and you've certified that yes, you're meeting our minimum requirements. Does that always happen? I'm sure it doesn't across the board, but that there's supposed to be some framework and some kind of commonality of terms and just a mutual understanding that these things are being met at a minimum. And like I said, if that worked perfectly every time, then there wouldn't be these supply chain attacks, right? And the things that we
That's
see.
true.
But
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, there's just so many different inroads. It's hard to plug all the holes, unfortunately.
Yeah. That's true. That's a good point. I know we're right around the hour mark, so we try to keep it right around the hour. But my last question, or I should say, my last topic to you is, Chris. I know I took your Security Plus Plural Site video series, and it was fantastic. So I encourage anybody out there to grab a Plural Site subscription. And I believe you guys, or Plural Site now, is in conjunction with a Cloud Guru, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And a Cloud Guru, and I actually get a Cloud Guru subscription and Pluralsight subscription through my work. So a Cloud Guru is fantastic. I really like what they're doing over there as well. So I'm glad they're part of the Pluralsight family. But what other courses are you doing on Pluralsight, Chris? If you want to do a plug or
Sure.
whatever is coming down the pipeline.
Yep. In the immediate pipeline, nothing within like the very short term, but I mean, I've done about 30 courses overall, a number of iterations of Security Plus, 401, 501, and 601. But I've also done a course on malware analysis, a big picture course, kind of a high level course, a couple in depth courses on security, governance, and management, disaster recovery, business continuity. So a number of different courses that kind of cover a gambit from just general like executive level security, governance, compliance type courses down to a little more technical and like I said, of course, threat intelligence and analysis course is kind of an intro to the CTIA course, and then a malware analysis big picture course.
Sweet.
Nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so I recommend anybody that's out there trying to do the security thing. Chris's his courses are fantastic. They're easy to they're easy flowing. It's not so cut and dry. Because I know a couple places that I've taken courses or done the video series. It's super dry and it just moans on. And Chris is not like that at all. So kudos to you, Chris, to try to, like you said, before we got on here, you're talking to a mic, so you don't know how good or how bad you are, but you come across good. It's not too crazy, not too heavy, and keep it light, and it really kind of sticks and comes across. So that's kudos to you.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I try to keep it fun. I'll tell some stupid jokes throughout the courses and try to at least keep people's attention, because I know when I'm sitting on the other side of the mic, I like to have my attention kept. So I try my best. So I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Dean, you have anything else before we get out of here?
Yeah, Chris, what's next for you in the world of technology? You said you're passionate and that's always been a part of you, and since you are sort of coming up. So what's next for you? What sparks your interest?
Truthfully, I've kind of well, at least where I'm at today, like the technology piece, I'm just looking to continue my career, my full-time job over at Cox, and continue just the security side with Pluralsight. But what really kind of sparked my interest lately is just the whole crypto world. And
now we're talking, my man. Yes.
Yeah. So I've switched a lot of my interest just trying to dig into crypto. I mean, obviously the mainstream stuff, but the altcoins, NFTs. So I'm spending a lot more time trying to, because you only have so many hours in a day. So I'm trying to learn as much as I can about that space. So that's got my interest, at least in the short term.
Okay, well, we got a podcast coming up for that, so maybe you can tune in and we can teach you some stuff. I've been delving in that for the last sort of 2 years now, so
okay,
I've
awesome.
got a lot to share.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
That's awesome. Chris, real quick before we wrap up, any security blogs or sites that you follow that sort of are like the Bible to you? Anything real good out there for listeners to tune in as far as security world?
Geez, I mean, the ones you mentioned, I think like the hacking sites are really good. One of the ones that if I just want to give a shout out, I think one of the bigger contributors to this space, Troy Hunt, who's another Pluralsight author, but he owns the site, Have I Been Pwned, or have I been owned? And so
Oh,
that's used.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's used by so many organizations, and I mean, even like 1Password, FBI, I think NSA even uses them now. So a lot of law enforcement agencies use them. So that's a
Yeah.
great one. It's not so much where you would interact with it every day, but just as far as a give back to the community and just a valuable service. I think that's one to definitely check out if you haven't
Check
seen it
out.
before.
Yeah, cool. Chris, are you on any social media? You want to plug your socials at all, or people connect with you?
No, most of my stuff like Facebook, Instagram is locked down, but Twitter is where I usually will communicate with everybody, and it's just CD
Okay.
Rees. At
Cool.
Twitter handles the CD Rees. So or Gmail, CD Rees at Gmail. Yeah, if anybody happens to take the course and wants to leave me a note, like I do get a lot of information off or feedback from LinkedIn or from Twitter, but I love to hear from folks, good or bad. If I can do something better, I'm always open to trying to refine the craft.
Sweet. Yeah, and for those of
Love
you,
it. Good.
I'll put Chris's socials in the show notes for this week. So if you want to go follow him and give him some kudos and connect, feel free. They'll be in the show notes. So Chris, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for hanging out with us and giving us a little insight to your part of the world. So we really appreciate you coming on, and we'll certainly have you back for the crypto talk if you wish.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Pat, Dean, it's been a pleasure. I certainly appreciate you guys reaching out to me, but by all means, please keep in touch.
Cool.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you for your time tonight.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Chris,
Appreciate
it's
it.
been awesome. Yeah, so everybody, we're gonna wrap up there. Like I said, we try to keep it right around an hour. So appreciate you joining in and giving us an hour of your day, because obviously we all know that we all could use some more time. So there's only 24 hours in a day. So again, thanks for joining this week of So You Want to Be in IT. Dean, we have the new website that's out there. It is actually live. We spun it up on Squarespace. So shout out to Squarespace and those guys for making it super easy to create a website. It's soyouwannabeinit.com. So go check that out. That is recently live as of this week. So obviously you can subscribe to the show right from there. There's a little about section for me and Dean. And Dean, I hope you don't mind. I actually put a few words in there. I did not consult you, so I'm sorry if anything
It's all good.
is weird.
Hopefully it's good and not trash.
No, it's good. It's good. It's generally harmless, generally. So, yeah, or you can listen to you can subscribe to the show right from there from any of your favorite platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, all that stuff. Or you can listen to the podcast right from there. So we get a count. If you listen through the embedded player, that is a count for us as well. So that makes our numbers look good. So, and then again, if you're on your own platforms of, like I said, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, look us up there and give us a review. That always plays well for us. Again, negative or positive, we'll take it all. Doesn't matter to us. So we don't necessarily know how we come across when we're behind the mic. So you got to tell us, and it just helps us refine the show. And as long as people listen, we're going to keep talking. So throw us a rating on the iTunes as well, or tell a friend, right? That works just as well in today's world. Just word of mouth is awesome too. So Twitter and Instagram at So You Want to Be in IT, Facebook.com/So You Want to Be in IT. And we also have a Discord server that we spun up for you guys to chat with us a little more intimately or bounce ideas off of, whatever. So if you're interested in that, the invite is in the show notes. So Chris, thanks again. This has been awesome. Dean, we'll see you next time. And that's it. We'll see you next week.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Is there anybody there?